Javid and Nadeem Zahawi. We'll come back to your calls in a moment, but let's talk to the social commentator and author of the satirical book Think Like a White Man, Nels Abbey. Now, Nels tweeted, Labour have overreacted to Rupa Huq and turned a minor flippant remark into a major distraction. Tip, be careful who you share a panel with when discussing matters of race, especially if you wish to be humorous or a little edgy. I'd personally avoid British Future altogether. Nels, very good evening. Let's take the end bit there, avoiding British Future. It's a very respected think tank.
Respect is in the eye of the beholder or so. I'm sure it's just not, it's that on these sorts of issues, I've found at times maybe British Future might not be the right people to talk about. So I think my concern was about particular characters within it, and they might not be the best people to speak about these things around because...
Well, you're insulting Sundar Katwala.
I want to say I'm insulting Sundar Katwala. I might be being a tad bit... No, I'm not. I'm just being a tad bit critical here and there. So I think Sundar has a prefect gene when it comes to these sorts of things sometimes or so, and it can breed a bit of an overreaction in times where it's not really intended to be.
Well, Rupa Huq's comments, I would say, speak for themselves. They're absolutely disgraceful. Why are you minimising them?
I wouldn't say I am minimising them. I would say that I view it perhaps slightly different to you insofar as I think that the impression I got from what Rupa was actually trying to say, I think Rupa was wrong to say it. I think Rupa was clumsy to say it. But the impression I got was that Rupa was trying to be humorous and express a little bit of edge on these things, which if you go into any sort of communal space or environment or so, this is how these things are often done sometimes to actually discuss these things. To discuss these things, sometimes we leverage humor, we leverage edge, we leverage all sorts of different things or devices to actually discuss it. But the way in which it was done, particularly that sort of environment, I just thought it was perhaps not the right place to say it. But also, too, it probably wasn't the right thing to say because it's also some of the things she said too were just patently not true. That you can tell that that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, is a black man when he speaks on the radio. I can quite clearly hear it. But beyond that too, Kwasi, of course, may have different politics to everybody else. That's totally fine. That's totally fine, provided those politics are not being leveraged to hurt the black community or black and brown people, which I'm afraid to say sometimes they have been. But thankfully, in recent times, he stepped away from the culture war stuff and gone a bit more into the financial side of things, where frankly, he's been a bit more damaging to all of us as a society.
I think the point about edge, there are... I don't know if you were listening earlier when I gave an example of Rupa Huq trying to be edgy on my programme, making some very inappropriate sort of sexual comment. So I think I can see that. But, she's not a comedian. She's an elected politician. And, politicians do like to try to be funny sometimes. But it's a good lesson to politicians in a way. Don't try to be funny unless you really are funny. And she's not.
Humour is to the modern human what the club was to the caveman, essentially. It's a way of actually getting people attracted. It's also a way of getting people elected. And the only way in order to know if you're funny or not is sometimes to give it a shot. It worked for Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson said a lot worse than Rupa Huq said. And Kwasi Kwarteng himself came out to defend Boris Johnson when he actually made these statements too. And Kwasi Kwarteng came out to defend the Windrush scandal. He was pretty much the government's pitch person to bat it back, which was a lot more serious racial situations than, say, anything Rupa Huq has said.
Somebody on Twitter is saying, exactly, it was a joke. Lighten up. You are so woke, Ian. I've never been described as woke before, I have to say. But I think in these circumstances, you have to think, well, what would the reaction be if somebody else had said that? If it was somebody, I don't know, a white right-wing conservative had said that? I don't know the answer to that question. But I think the other interesting thing is here, and I did talk to Sundar about this, is that in a way it's a sort of slightly weird form of racism itself in the things that she said, and there are so many different forms of racism, aren't there? We always think of it as white on black racism, and it probably is the most prevalent. But there are all sorts of different forms of racism, aren't there, within different ethnic minority groups?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. There's disputes where there's people. There are disputes. If you look at what happened over the last weekend, for example, you will see that disputes within what we would normally describe as Asian communities became rather hot, dare I put it, or so. As a man from Maida Vale, I can tell you that. I can tell you that categorically. But the key thing here is that, in response to your first question, that if the shoe was on the other side or the other foot, and it was a white right-wing member of parliament, or say prime minister or so, who was actually making, or member of the Conservative Party, who was making such a comment, I could tell you what would happen. Kwasi Kwarteng or somebody like him would be out defending them, would pretty much be leveraging their identity to provide cover for them. And the reason why I know that would happen, because it's what has happened time and time and time again.
Nels, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. That's Nels Abbey, the social commentator. His book is called Think Like a White Man. Right, let's go back to your calls.